Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Down the Tee Tennis podcast, where this time we will be reviewing the singles tournaments, men's and women's, at the 2022 US Open, where we had new names on both trophies. Carlos Alcaraz, the men's champion, his first Grand Slam title, I believe now the youngest man to win a Slam title since Rafael Nadal, the first teenager since Rafael Nadal. So plenty to cover there. On the women's side, Iga Swiatek continuing her excellent season and finally getting her hands on a Slam title outside of the French Open. It was only a matter of time for Iga, and now she's done it, her third Grand Slam title. So we'll start on that men's tournament, and I suppose start with the men's final, Carlos Alcaraz versus Casper Ruud. Did you catch much of it, Ewan, and what did you make of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had the chance to see the match almost in full, since I didn't get to see it as much live as I would have liked, but I did see the first set and a decent chunk of the second set, and have since come back to watch it today. And yeah, a very interesting final for the reasons, as you said. Now got a new world number one in Carlos Alcaraz, and the youngest Slam winner since Nadal. And yeah, it was fascinating to see both Alcaraz and Casper Ruud battling for the number one title and the first Grand Slam title at the same time. It was, I think one of the highest stakes matches in that sense we've seen for a long time, with both those huge prizes being there for the winner. And yeah, it was fantastic to see Alcaraz make a breakthrough and win his first Slam. I mean, at such a young age, but it feels like we've known about him for a long time. His talent, we've discussed him so many times on the show, how good we think he's going to be potentially as a multiple Grand Slam winner and world number one. And he's got there so early, it has to be said, really. Still being some way off his 20th birthday it's an incredible achievement to see him get there this soon. And again, not entirely unexpected, you would say, even though it has been an open tournament, definitely on the men's side, but still among the favorites for the title for me. And yeah, it was very impressive to see how he held off Ruud in 4 sets, who I was extremely impressed by, really, in this match and in the tournament in general. I didn't quite see him as a contender for the title, Ruud, but so it was really impressive to see the level he brought on hard courts. We know what he's been capable of on clay, but yeah, it was just so impressed by Alcaraz how he responded after dropping the second set, saved set points in the third set, crucially, those 2 set points, which he could have fallen down 2 sets to 1, then had to go 5 sets again. After, let's not forget, he played 3 straight 5 sets from the fourth round to the semi-finals, all brutal matches, which finished extremely late at night. I mean, you've got to be extremely impressed in all areas by Alcaraz, mentally, physically, in terms of how his game's developed as well. And there's still, I think, a long way he can still go in that department. It's an incredible warning sign he's already sent out, I think, at this age. And but a fantastic final, brilliant for both players, I think, to do this at this stage of the career. And Ruud reaching a hardcore Grand Slam final, his second Grand Slam final of the year after the French Open. It's been a fantastic season for him to climb to world number 2 now. So yeah, both great stories.
Yeah, it was, and it was such an interesting story going into that final, that it was not only a battle for the first US Open and a first Grand Slam title between the two players, but also for the world number 1 spot. And I see it's a joke thrown about. I don't think it's a genuine criticism about Casper Ruud. The fact that he kind of farms points at ATP 250s, clay 250s, where he has had a lot of success. And it is interesting that he is yet to pick up a title above the 250 level. I think he's now got a Masters 1000 final to his name and 2 Grand Slam finals. So it is weird that, there's just that little gap in between. He's a Grand Slam finalist, but he's only as much as a ATP 250 winner. But I think what we've seen from him in the slams this year has been really impressive. We've seen him do it on more surfaces, obviously, with the final in, was it, I want to say Miami, or he could have, yeah, it was Miami, wasn't it? Because Taylor Fritz won Indian Wells. So we've seen him on hard courts, we've seen him deeper runs in bigger tournaments, and I think it's only a matter of time until we see more titles to his name. The final, I thought it was a great contest. I actually thought Casper Ruud was maybe the better player for the second set, which he won. And a lot of the third set as well, I actually thought, but I just thought Alcaraz showed that grit and that determination to just hang in there, and then he managed to start showing his quality again towards the end of that set. And once again, both players are immense athletes. Like, the court coverage of both these guys is absolutely insane. But they also, bash the ball. Like, they both do like to release. Casper Ruud maybe a little less so than Alcaraz, but still, he does get some crazy RPMs on that ball. It hits heavy topspin, and he can hit winners off both wings. He tries to avoid the backhand a bit, which I think his backhand's decent when he's got it firing. I think it has been weaponized at times, but you could see it was actually both players were trying to pin each other into the backhand corners, but both players also seem to be trying to hit inside out as much as possible. And it was an attritional battle. There was plenty of insane points in there where both players are just chasing around the court. In terms of quality for you, Ewan, where does it stack up compared to a final that it would include at least one or maybe two members of the big three plus Murray and Wawrinka?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's high standards, probably the highest standards to compare it to in the Open era, maybe in tennis history. But I think maybe you'd say it wasn't quite on the level with the very best of those finals, but that we did see between Nadal, Djokovic, Federer, Murray, as you said, like the ones which spring to mind: the 2008 Wimbledon final, the 2012 Australian Open final, just as some of probably the greatest matches of all time. You wouldn't put it on that level, but I thought that the quality was high. I thought both players played, if not at their best, at a very high level, and I thought it was a very enjoyable match. The quality of the tennis, as you said, was very high. I think just the consistency from both players. They're both very strong players from the baseline, but strong physically, great athletes. I think two of the best movers and defenders on the tour, particularly Alcaraz. I mean, the speed the guy possesses is incredible. And then, as you say, just a complete game. Really, he's developing still with as I said, room for improvement, particularly on the serve. But I mean, from both sides, what he brings, also the variety. We see him at the net, the drop shots. It's a fantastic package to watch. And Ruud, I think, has also improved a lot recently. I mean, as you mentioned, his backhand, I think, is a shot which has improved a lot, which I think has been a weakness from him. I think he's got one of the very best forehands in the game. His serve's much improved, and I think we just saw a really good clash between two what you'd say are modern players, two at the very elite level, both now the top two in the rankings. And I think you can see why with them, how well-rounded the games are, but just how they've got the combination of big weapons and the great defensive skills. And I think that tends to make for great tennis. It's been a theme of Alcaraz's matches in this tournament, how many incredible rallies you've seen. I think it pretty much happened, at least one of them in every match from the Cilic one onwards, just these incredible cat and mouse points where Alcaraz is retrieving about 3 more shots than it looks like he's going to be able to get to. And some of them he's won and lost, but it's fantastic to watch. And I think that's we've got just a fantastic showcase of that in this tournament and if it's a sign of things to come, I mean, it's going to be incredible to watch this guy for the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, and you mentioned those cat and mouse battles. I just want to throw one in there from I think it was the first round. It came up against Sebastian Baez, was it? It was, didn't? And honestly, there was some insane rallies in that match as well. I caught a fair bit of that match. Unfortunately, Baez had to retire in the third set due to injury. He pushed Alcaraz quite far in the first 2 sets and lost. So because Baez is like that as well, his court coverage is also up there with the best. Obviously, he's one of the shorter guys on the tour, but there's plenty of fight in him. So I think that I'd like to see more Alcaraz versus Baez battles going forward. I think Baez is earlier in his development. He maybe has a lower ceiling than Alcaraz, but he's definitely got a game that could test him. And like I say, pushed him hard on hard courts in the first 2 sets. I'd love to see him play on a clay court where you'd think it brings Baez into it a little bit more. But obviously going into the tournament, a huge theme was certain names missing, which once again we've covered in depth. And then Rafa going in with a little bit of uncertainty. Well, I'll read the list of names from the quarterfinalists for you, and it is quite unique, really, in this era of men's tennis. We've got Nick Kyrgios, Karen Khachanov, Matteo Berrettini, Casper Ruud, Yannick Sinner, Carlos Alcaraz, Andrei Rublev, Frances Tiafoe. Even with the uncertainty around Rafa and obviously other names missing, did you ever expect that those 8 players would be the list of quarterfinalists we'd have in the men's game?
No, I didn't quite expect that lineup as we'd unfortunately be able to see if we went back and looked at my predictions. But I mean, probably the less said about them, the better. But no, I mean, I think we did expect an open tournament coming in. But yeah, I do think it was a surprising lineup. I mean, they're all seeded players, the 8 quarterfinalists, and I think some of them, I think you would expect, you're not surprised to see there the likes of Alcaraz, Sinner, Ruud, Kyrgios, you'd say, with the form he's been in, and Rublev, who's made 6 Grand Slam quarterfinals now. But yeah, I think Berrettini, you'd have to say. I mean, they're not shocking names, but as you say, with Medvedev and Nadal being the 2 top seeds, and I think the 2 favorites in most people's eyes, not reaching that stage was definitely a big shock. And obviously, we've had the absence of Djokovic, also Zverev not playing at this tournament through injury. So yeah, it was an unexpected lineup, definitely, particularly for me. Khachanov and Tiafoe, I mean, to make the semi-finals, they would be the 2 biggest surprises. Even though we have seen these players reach Grand Slam quarterfinals in the past, I think, I was extremely impressed by the runs we saw from those 2, just because the form wasn't really there coming in, particularly from Khachanov point of view. From Tiafoe, there'd been a few more signs, but neither of them, you just said, had a great preparation to the tournament. So yeah, it was a tournament of surprises, but at the same time, I'm not shocked with maybe the 2 finalists and some of those quarterfinalists that were mentioned. But it definitely made it interesting. And as you mentioned, the quality of tennis, there's always the question about what it's going to be like after the big 3, big 4, plus Wawrinka and the other great players we've had in the past decade and more. But I think we did see some fantastic matches throughout the tournament, but particularly in the last stages of the men's draw. And just as mentioned, a lot of them involved Carlos Alcaraz. I mean, particularly, I think the match against Yannick Sinner was, the match of the tournament for me, and probably one of the greatest matches I would say in recent years.
Yeah, another one of those Yannick Sinner versus Carlos Alcaraz battles. I think Carlos has referenced it many times that he hopes that Yannick can keep improving, that he can keep improving, and they can keep pushing each other forward, making each other better. And I think that's what we've seen, since Carlos had the better of the head-to-head in the early matches, to Yannick Sinner really trying to turn it around on him, getting that win against Wimbledon, which people didn't really have him down for. And then getting another win against him, following up in one of the clay tournaments post-Wimbledon. Don't ask me to name a specific one, because it's a minefield, those tournaments. But aside from that, another Yannick Sinner versus Carlos Alcaraz battle, I want to touch on Frances Tiafoe's tournament. I mean, he's a player that's I feel like I've known the name Tiafoe for quite a while. He's now in his sort of mid-20s, he's at the age of 24. He was tipped to be quite highly rated when he was younger, but I feel like he got to a level and he plateaued, and he was just another one of these solid names on the tour, but you never really saw him challenging for a slam. Well, he made the semi-finals at the US Open, his home tournament, and pushed the eventual winner all the way in that match. His story, his background is also incredible as well. It's so different to what we see in tennis. So how much of this is almost a sliding doors moment for Frances Tiafoe? Do you, from an honest point of view, think it might be a bit of a flash in the pan?
Well, I think it's a very big moment, and I think you're right that I didn't really, see him as a contender for a slam before this. You've seen him, as you said, as a very talented player. That's the way he's been viewed since he emerged on the tour, really. But yeah, we hadn't really seen him go close at the big events for the last couple of years. But I think there'd been signs of improvement working with Wayne Ferreira, and maybe we've seen that really bear fruits in this tournament. And it's a big breakthrough for him. I would say, with the level we saw him produce in this tournament, I would be surprised if it's a flash in the pan, because I don't think it was, he wasn't really fortunate with the wins he did get. I mean, dropping just a set en route to the semi-finals, and that was against his win over Nadal. I mean, a fairly big upset for me. Okay, Nadal, was struggling in that match, but just an extremely impressive performance from Tiafoe. And what was arguably more impressive is how he backed it up against Andrei Rublev. We've seen, the times Nadal has been upset in Grand Slams, particularly sort of the last 5 to 10 years, so many times the players has lost in the next round. It's so difficult to back it up emotionally, and he went out there and produced probably an even better performance against Rublev. I thought in that quarterfinal, it was outstanding, and as you say, push Alcaraz to 5 sets. Just played another fantastic match in what was another contender for match of the tournament. Yeah, so impressed by Tiafoe. It was fantastic to see him have that big slam breakthrough at his home Grand Slam. We've seen how he engages with the crowd. I mean, he really was, I think, probably the crowd favorite of the tournament. Certainly on the men's side, obviously with Serena, we'll come on to talk about. But yeah, the crowd support he got was incredible. He really fed off that, and I do think he has the ability to do this again, particularly as we're going to see the Grand Slam tournaments more open in the coming years as the likes of Nadal and Djokovic move closer at the end. So Tiafoe, I think it's a big step, and we could see more of it.
And another point on one of the quarterfinalists I just want to touch on. Nick Kyrgios making another quarterfinal, another strong run. He was extremely disappointed at the end of that quarterfinal where he lost to Karen Khachanov in 5 sets. I think it feels, especially with the list of names left in the tournament, not the bad names, but just considering the Wimbledon that he had, the Washington that he had, and I think I probably had him pinned down for my second favourite behind the eventual winner of Yannick Sinner versus Carlos Alcaraz when we reached the quarterfinal point. He seems to have matured to an extent in that he comes to these tournaments thinking he can win them and wants to win them, and he seems to be doing more work in training with his fitness. The way that he reacted to that loss shows that there is, that kind of raw emotion still there, maybe, which spills over a bit too much. But how big of a missed opportunity do you think this might be for Nick Kyrgios?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt it's quite a big missed opportunity, and I mean, I've got kind of mixed feelings on Kyrgios's tournament, because I think there was a lot of real positives. The way you could say he backed up a big run at Wimbledon he was impressive in the early rounds. Had an outstanding win over Daniil Medvedev in the 4th round, the defending champion, who's been fantastic at this event since 2019. I mean, that was really a stunning performance from Kyrgios. You could argue as good as any performance in his career. It's probably up there with the win over Nadal at Wimbledon for me. Just extremely impressed by the level he brought, the concentration really. And then it's the thing again about backing it up. You'll be disappointed not to beat Khachanov in the next round, as well as Khachanov was playing. I mean, he did have an excellent tournament, Khachanov, and he's a very good player. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, I think Kyrgios, he should have won that match. He had his chances, struggling a little bit with the injury early on in the match, but he said it wasn't really a factor, for the majority of the match. He didn't blame that. I think he took responsibility for the loss. But yeah, just he didn't play the big points as well as Khachanov. That was really the difference. And I think, you'll be disappointed after he took out the number 1 seed, the world number 1 at the time, and he really did open up the draw for himself. And as you said, for me, he was probably the joint favorite with Alcaraz, maybe at that stage, if not a slight second favorite. That just given how well he played against Medvedev and the form he's been in this year. But yeah, you can see how devastated he was, and you're right. I think that's probably a sign of the pressure that he's putting on himself now, that he really does want to win a Grand Slam. But he hasn't kind of been in this position many times. Wimbledon was, obviously by far the furthest he's been. He'd had 2 quarterfinals in Grand Slams before that, but back in 2014 and 15. So this is still, this was the furthest he's been at the US Open. So I think, he wasn't ready really to handle the pressure of being one of the favorites. It is different to being an underdog, which I think we know he thrives in. But now that he's been in this situation, I think once he steps back and reflects on it, he might be able to use it as a positive. And I do still expect him to be a contender on the hard courts and the grass at Grand Slam level next year. I think with the motivation he has, if that remains, I think, the tennis he's got, he has to be a contender for slams now. So yeah, some positives, maybe a negative that he didn't take the chance, but I think he'll get more if he continues in this vein we've seen since the grass court season, really.
And just final thoughts on the men's draw. Is there any talking points that we've discussed that we haven't discussed yet that you'd just like to touch on? I think maybe fourth round X64 Nadal and Medvedev, we haven't covered that extensively, but you have just gone into Kyrgios's performance against the Russian. So yeah, just the floor is yours, Ewan. Is there anyone else that you'd like to mention, or any other news that you'd like to mention from the men's tournament?
Yeah, well, I would say, just as we said, we touched a bit on Medvedev. I think, yeah, just a sign that he hasn't quite been at his best really since the Australian Open, and did carry on into this tournament. What, you know, the first real test he came up against, he didn't quite have his best, as good as Kyrgios was there. So, you know, still maybe a way to go before he really gets back to his best. But maybe the pressure of world number one off his back now might help. And with Nadal, it just didn't quite look right in the tournament. It's, you know, unknown whether he's still fully got over the abdominal injury from Wimbledon. Obviously, he was only coming in with the one match under his belt from Cincinnati, and it just didn't play particularly well in the early rounds, besides the win over Gasquet, which we know you can't read too much into because of the head-to-head. So yeah, he did struggle in the Tiafoe match, as good as Tiafoe was, and as much as he fully deserves the credit for the win. I mean, particularly towards the end of the match, Nadal really did fade. He said he's not sure when he's going to come back, so you know there might still be an issue there, but definitely I think he'll be disappointed, but maybe he just wasn't quite right coming into the tournament. So yeah, an upset, but I think he's had an incredible year at the Grand Slams. So I think overall he would have definitely taken the two that he's won, even though it is unfortunate if it is another injury after what happened at Wimbledon. And another, I think, player who just definitely deserves a mention was Jack Draper. You know, from a British point of view, had a really impressive win over Felix Auger-Aliassime in the second round to beat him, you know, for the loss of just 12 games. I mean, a player who's reached the semi-finals last year. Fantastic win for Draper, and was really unfortunate to be stopped by an injury in his third round match against Karen Khachanov when he was up a break at 1-set. So I mean, I think Draper, he was possibly on his way for a good run there if his body didn't let him down, but really encouraging signs for him. And maybe just to finally touch on a couple of big upsets, you'd say in the first round, Taylor Fritz and Stefanos Tsitsipas both going out to the qualifiers in Brandon Hall and Daniel Galan. Pretty big surprises for me, really, the biggest shocks on the men's side, but it did make for an even more open tournament and certainly an enjoyable one.
Yeah, and Taylor Fritz, who I think we both predicted for a really strong run here. So going out to his compatriot, his young compatriot, that was certainly a surprising one. Andy Murray as well, solid tournament, straight sets versus Cerundolo. You know, he's a good player. You know, beat the young American Emilio Nava, and then 4 sets against Berrettini, considering, you know, the relative age of the two, and you know, Berrettini, although he's had his injury issues at times, as you know, you'd certainly say he's fresher. Decent signs, you know. You're not calling for Murray to just retire yet.
I'm not. I mean, I know there still seems to be some who you want to do that at every opportunity, but no, I think you're right. There was some encouraging signs, particularly just, you know, winning the first 2 matches convincingly. That's been the big problem for him in the slams, really, since the hip injury. He just can't seem to avoid playing a marathon against anyone in the early rounds. So there's some really good signs there, and you might be a little bit disappointed to not, you know, obviously pull it off against Berrettini. I don't think we quite saw the best of Berrettini in this tournament, but like you say, a 4-set loss to Berrettini, who did go on to reach the quarters. It's not a bad result, and I think a step in the right direction. So some encouraging signs to head into 2023 for Murray, I would say.
And we'll end the men's tournament there. Before we start to go into the women's tournament, it was actually a women's tournament, but as everyone knows, marked the end of the career of probably the greatest women's player of all time, Serena Williams. Just in a nutshell, before you go further into it, 73 career titles, 23 of those are Grand Slam singles titles. She's also got, I was going to say a handful, a lot more of a handful than a handful of doubles titles as well, Grand Slam titles. You know, and just everything, the Olympic Games, the WTA Tour finals, just pretty much anything you can win in tennis. Serena won it and she dominated it for a long time. We said we'd go into more depth on Serena's career once the tournament was over, and I think we're still saying we might go into even more depth with maybe a one-off special, because that's how incredible her career is. It deserves that kind of thing. But you know, as much as you can right now, just summarize your thoughts on Serena and you know, the end of one of the greatest tennis careers of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is hard to do justice to what she has achieved, and you know, we're going to try our best in this video, and as you mentioned, hopefully in another one where we look back. But I think it was a really good end. Obviously, you know, the fairy tale ending would have been to win the title, to get that 24th Grand Slam to tie Margaret Court. But I think short of that, this is, you know, really as good as it could have been. We saw her play 3 matches, win 2 in really impressive fashion against Danka Kovinic and Annette Kontaveit. I mean, you know, the number 2 seed, a fantastic win she pulled off there in the second round. Serena, just the level of tennis I think she produced, it really in all 3 matches was, you know, remarkable. You know, for a 4-year-old who's, you know, close to the age of 41 and barely played tennis in recent years. Certainly the last 18 months due to the injury, and obviously coming back from a really difficult pregnancy. I think what we've seen her achieve since then has been incredible, even though she hasn't quite got that final slam. I think to reach 4 more finals since that, you know, at Grand Slam level is an incredible achievement in itself. And yeah, the final match, as we assume it is going to be, of a career against Ayla Tomljanovic in the third round. You know, it was a really incredible effort. You know, well over 3 hours for the 3 sets, and incredibly the only match of a career at the US Open which went over 3 hours, and it just, I think, showed the fight she still had until the end in that match. You know, to come from a set down, I think she was up a double break in the second set, ended up getting pegged back, taking it on a tie break in you know, an incredible second set, grueling. You know, it had everything really, the level of tennis, physicality, twists, and then didn't quite have enough left in the final step, but still, even at a double breakdown with Tomljanovic serving for the match, I mean, Serena just produced incredible effort to stave off several match points in a game which, you know, lasting well over 10 minutes. I think just it was a fitting way to show, you know, the heart of a champion that she has, and just the resilience, the refusal to, you know, to lose in, you know, in the final match like that. It's something we've seen so many times over the years, winning Grand Slam titles after saving match points, you know, fighting through it even when she doesn't quite have her best. You know, just making her opponent earn at the end. You wouldn't have been surprised to see her turn it around even at the end there. So it was a fantastic performance, even though it did end with a defeat that was always likely at this age, that she wasn't going to quite be able to go and win the title given a lack of matches coming in. But I thought, you know, a really good way to end it, and fantastic that, I mean, we saw the crowd's reaction to her support for her really said it all in the 3 matches, and also that doubles match alongside her sister Venus Williams. It was fantastic to see those 2 play possibly for the last time. So we'd assume, you know, barring a Serena comeback, which she hasn't completely ruled out, but if we are going to assume that was the last time, it was great to see those 2 incredible champions take to the court in doubles again, as you touched on at the start, how many times they've done it on the doubles court and won at Grand Slam level. Just, so yeah, it was a fantastic send off, I think, for Serena, to, you know, as you rightly mentioned, an incredible career.
Yeah, indeed. And you know, just for a second, after she came through her first 2 matches, I did start to think, if anyone can, it's a. But it wasn't to be. What we got actually was, and we always talk about how unpredictable the women's game is, a final between Iga Swiatek and Ons Jabeur, who are 2 of the most consistent players in the WTA in terms of reaching far in tournaments on a consistent basis. You know, I think I've predicted this final a few times already, and it's finally happened. You know, in a slam final. So, you know, 2 of the best players in the WTA right now. What did you make of the final that they produced?
Yeah, I thought it was a very good final, particularly the second set, obviously, which did go to a tiebreak where we saw Jabeur really raise a level and looked briefly like we could go the distance there, which I mean hasn't happened for so long in a final that Swiatek's been involved in, particularly the Grand Slams. We know she's we've talked about her incredible record in finals at all levels, which she's won all of them since her first WTA final that she lost. She hasn't lost a set since then. I mean, this is the closest she's come to dropping one during that run, certainly in a Grand Slam. So, yeah, I think Jabeur had a difficult start to the match. Didn't quite have her best. Was struggling early on. Iga made a red hot start. I think really, even though we maybe hadn't seen the very best of her since the French Open, I think that was probably as well as she's played it since then in that first set. And in the second set, I think still maintained a really high level. But we saw, as I mentioned, Jabeur raise it, really bring her best tennis to the court, which it did look, there was a concern that it might not happen given how the match was going, and came close to taking it the distance. She had break points, I think, deep into that second set before it did go to a tiebreak, which also could have gone either way. But yeah, it was a fantastic contest between these two, who I think, despite what the rankings might say, have been the two best players this year. Clearly, obviously, Swiatek, a dominant number one, but Jabeur for me has been a clear number two. And as you said, we've thought this final looked likely a couple of times. I'm really glad we did get to see it this time, because I think it is a really interesting matchup with everything that Jabeur brings. She's someone who I think's just the complete game. She's got the variety as well as the power. It was fantastic to see her bring that to the table and test Swiatek in a way that I don't think many of the players can. So hopefully this is the first meeting between these two at the back end of big events, because I think it's got the potential to be a fantastic rivalry. But yeah, for Swiatek, as you mentioned earlier, third Grand Slam, the first away from the French Open. I think it was only a matter of time, but I think it's fitting that she has added that second slam this year, given what a dominant season she's had, the winning streak we know she put together earlier in the year, which included a lot of victories on hard courts. I think it is fitting she's added this US Open title to cap off an incredible season. And for Jabeur, like Casper Ruud, has reached a second major final this year and fallen just short. But again, signs she's getting closer, and I don't think it's the last Grand Slam final we're going to be seeing on Jabeur, and I'm pretty confident she can win one, whether it's next year or in the coming years. She's still, I think, in a prime now, you would say, and still got room to improve. So yeah, it was a very good final. Really enjoyed it, and hopefully, as mentioned, the first of many between these two.
Yeah, I think, as you pretty much touched on, the way Ons Jabeur played in the second set was probably just about well enough to win that set and win a match at that level against anyone except Iga Swiatek. I think it was a great final. I think between two of the best ball strikers in the WTA, like the way that they both hit the ball from the back of the court, it's they are some of the best in the women's game. I think where Ons Jabeur has a slight advantage on Iga, and it's not that Iga lacks these skills, but I think Ons has a bit more at the net and with the drop shots and the variety of the play. On top of, it's built on really solid ground strokes, but she does resort to using a wider range of skills more than Iga does. And that's why I think the match, although it was a great display, especially the second set, a great display in ball striking between, the two players, I think Ons Jabeur really didn't need to get herself caught into a match of ground strokes from the baseline. If she's going to beat Iga, because the only player that she'll probably run into these problems against on a consistent basis is Iga. If you're not going to beat her in a battle of who's got the best ground strokes, even though Onza's are brilliant, Iga's just that little bit better. So I thought I wanted to see a bit more from her. I know on hard courts it's easier to get caught in these battles of ground strokes. The consistency of the bounce, I think, certainly tempts players to just play it not really that bit safer if you're redlining and going for lines, but I suppose from a baseline, it does feel safer than coming into the net, than drop shot. It's obviously safer than drop shots, as we saw with Carlos, a fantastic player when it comes to drop shots, but it's started to let him down with that shot in the final. So yeah, that was my only question really, Jabeur, whether she could have maybe tried to mix it up a bit, but obviously that's so much easier said than done when that ball's coming at you with so much interest. It can be hard to mix up the play, but with Iga, the scary thing is, and probably the same for Carlos as well, like she's just going to get better at her age. She's still only 21. She's still developing. She's probably not even 3 full years into life on the main tour as well. She's just going to get better and better, and she already, I don't want to say is completely dominant, but she seems like a long way ahead of the pack, and on very similar courts coming up in Australia at the start of next year. I just cannot look beyond her. She's had strong runs there in the past. But away from the finalists now on the tournament as a whole, you know, who else caught your eye throughout the tournament?
Yeah, well, I think Caroline Garcia is definitely a player who should start. And I mean, I think firstly it is interesting looking at the draw. I don't think the women's draw is maybe quite as open as we've come to see a lot in the last couple of years on the WTS side. It was a little bit more not predictable, but names you weren't too shocked to see then. And Garcia, with the form she was coming in with, I think you'd have to say really was, you know, the form player post French Open. As you know, I mentioned, Iga had a slight dip from the incredible standards she'd set in the first half of the season, and Garcia, I mean, since the grass court season has just been incredible. Carried that on here with a run to a first Grand Slam semi-final in singles. Obviously, she's got a fantastic record in doubles, but yeah, just I mean, the level of tennis she continued to produce here to reach the semis without dropping a set was fantastic to see. I mean, she is an incredible player to watch, and I think when she is on, as she has been recently, and it's great to see, because I mean, I think she has always been seen as really one of the most talented players in the women's game for the last 5 years or more, but we haven't seen it in consistent periods produce a level like this since really 2017. Towards the end of the season would be the only time you'd compare it to. But yeah, I really hope it is going to continue, because I think again she's another player who we could see win a slam in the end. Maybe the occasion against Jabeur was just in a first Grand Slam semi-final, she wasn't quite able to produce the level we've been seeing from her, and Jabeur obviously had a lot to do with that as well, with how well she played really towards the back end of the tournament. So yeah, Garcia, just the ultra aggressive approach I think we've seen her adopt more recently, the confidence, the improvement with a serve, and on the return of serve, how aggressive she's been. I think, yeah, she's an intimidating player to play against, and yeah, for me, she's going to be a contender really potentially at all the slams next year if she continues at this level and maintains the confidence she has right now.
So I think in the preview, referring to the women's draw, I said something along the lines of look at the draw and throw darts at it, or something in terms of picking names. But looking at the list of quarterfinals, I think kind of shows. I don't mean that as in, you know, anyone can do it just because, you know, it's that competitive, that close between everybody. I just mean that there's so much talent, that so many players that don't put it together consistently. But looking at the quarterfinalists, I feel like every player that's there, you could say, yeah, I could have seen them making the quarterfinal. I maybe didn't predict it, but I wouldn't be that shocked if you told me that they did. I think Tomljanovic came through, one of the most informed players at the time going into the tournament, in Samsonova in the 4th round. And then you've also got Aryna Sabalenka, who's had some struggles this season, but we all know she's a player that can really challenge. I feel like for slam titles she can challenge when she strings it together. So just looking at, you know, more of the players that went far in this tournament, is there anybody else you'd like to touch upon?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'll just echo what you said. Really, with I don't think it was a massively surprising quarterfinal lineup. I think, given I did kind of base my predictions by going for a few surprises, given what we've seen on the women's side for the last year to 18 months. But this was a lot of those names really you're not shocked to see it in a Grand Slam quarterfinal and beyond. And Sabalenka, who reached a third Grand Slam semi-final at this event, was an example of that. A return to form for her after it hasn't had the greatest year, but making the semi-finals here as she did last year, and also at Wimbledon last year was a really impressive run, and not one I quite expected given the form she'd been in, but we know she's absolutely capable of this, particularly on fast surfaces and here as we saw 12 months ago. So I think it was great to see her back to form and confident given some of the struggles I think she's had with her second serve this year. Double faults have been plaguing her a bit, but she did seem to put that behind her to some degree here and produce some really impressive performances, particularly against Pliskova in the quarterfinals, but also against Swiatek in the semi-finals, where she did lead, I think, was it 4-2 in the final set, sort of a break in the end, couldn't quite go over the line, albeit a tough loss for her. I think all three of her Grand Slam semi-final defeats have come in pretty tight three-setters, so she's been close, but she's put herself in a position there. She's knocking on the door, and I think if these issues with her serve are behind her, I'm sure she'll be going deep in Grand Slam tournaments again, and she's still very capable of winning one for me, still being young. So it was good to see Sabalenka back, and that match against Swiatek was a good one. Also Pegula, I think we saw again just how consistent she's been, really making a fourth quarterfinal, falling to Swiatek again, but a pretty respectable performance she put in, not far away from taking the second set. So again, just another player who really keeps knocking on the door. And I think, given what we've seen from her really for the last 2 years, I think it's a matter of time before she makes that breakthrough to the semis or maybe even further at a Grand Slam. So it was good to see her have that run at a home event. Coco Gauff also reaching a Grand Slam quarterfinal away from Roland Garros for the first time, and obviously doing it for the first time at a home Grand Slam was an impressive run from her. She really did produce a high level of tennis, was just stopped by the incredible form of Garcia in the end. But yeah, really encouraging for her. And Tomljanovic, I think, as you mentioned, had a fantastic win over Serena in the third round, but also against Lyudmila Samsonova in the fourth round, who, like you said, was in an incredible form, winning 2 titles on the American hard courts, heading into the tournament, hadn't dropped a set for a long time. So that was, I think Tomljanovic saving 7 set points in the first set of that match. So Tomljanovic, her third quarterfinal at Grand Slam level, but a first one away from Wimbledon. So I think we've really seen some impressive form from her at the big events, really more recently, and just what she produced here, I think, is as well as she's ever played. So definitely someone to watch out for going forward, because I think she could maybe take another step further again. And also Karolina Pliskova, worth a mention, I think, for her return to form in reaching the quarterfinals here after what hadn't been a great year for her. Yeah, just a reminder of what she's capable of, and that it had been a bad run, but she's certainly still going to be a factor going forward if she plays like that.
And just finally, women's tournament at the US Open. Just any final thoughts on the tournament, or anything that you'd like to wrap up?
Well, yeah, it was definitely an enjoyable tournament, and just a couple of other players I would touch on would be Simona Halep, for me, being probably the biggest surprise at EXA early on. There weren't too many top seeds really eliminated in the first or second round. Okay, I mean, Konavé, Sakari would be a couple of others, but not maybe as surprising as Halep for me, given the form we've seen from her since the grass court season. Has since had an operation on her nose. She said she'd been having some issues with her breathing, because that really was a pretty staggering loss for me in the first round. But maybe you can explain it a little bit. It was a shame for her given the form she'd been in. But also Emma Raducanu, just on her title defense, ending at the first hurdle with Alizé Cornet, which, I mean, was a really, really difficult draw. I think, as we talked about going into the tournament, Cornet is, with a record of upsetting top players in Grand Slams, and really just how impressive she's been this year, particularly at the majors. So, not a bad loss for Raducanu, who was always going to be a difficult one coming back here to defend the title. Obviously, just had a big drop in the rankings now, but possibly is just going to release some of the pressure that she's no doubt been feeling over the last 12 months as the US Open champion, and will maybe just allow her now to to get down and continue to build her experience on the tour without that target on her back that she's probably had really as a big scalp. So yeah, maybe she'll be disappointed to be that early, but I think she talked about being relieved. So yeah, I think it could be a good thing for Raducanu going forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you say, is just relieving some of that pressure. And, you know, she can go back to being just a young player break. Well, maybe not with the way the media is, but hopefully she can just go back to being a young player breaking through rather than having the expectation to win tournaments and win matches. I think she's been unfairly, you know, tagged with so early in her, you know, her senior level career. Oh no, Snyder that beat Simona Halep, Darius Snyder. The first time I saw her play, like actually saw her play, was at Ilkley. So live in the flesh, and the first thing that struck me about her was she has really strange ground strokes. I feel like she goes like, you think a typical topspin ground stroke is a low to high. There's more to it than that, but basically your swing is low and it comes high. Whereas I feel like Snyder hits most of her ground strokes like low to low, like she just, you know, quite a flat swing just across her body. But it seems to work for her. She's, you know, she's quite a reasonably established young talent. You know, a junior slam champion. So interesting to see what could come from her. Obviously, like we say, Halep may have been struggling from some difficulties in that first round to explain the result, and so it's hard to tell. Like I say, you never know when somebody's going to break through. And with junior slam champions, not that it isn't a great thing to have to your name, but it's not a guarantee of success. So I think that pretty much brings us to the end of the US Open 2022, where you know what? A really enjoyable tournament, I feel. Just have you got any final thoughts on the US Open as a whole?
Well, yeah, I mean, just that it was it was great to see. I think maybe things we haven't seen maybe on both the men's and women's sides in recent years, which on the men's side, it's been a bit more open than we've expected, but it's still been really enjoyable. Obviously, there's always the questions, as we touched on earlier, about what tennis is going to be like post this incredible era that we've had on the men's side. But I think we've seen with some of the young talent and some of the players slightly older, like Tiafoe, Kyrgios, but still you'd consider pretty young. That yeah, they're really the improvements they've made. We've still got a lot of fantastic and very entertaining players to watch. So I think it is in good hands, even if you know those guys are going to be irreplaceable. And on the women's side, a little bit more consistent, which again has been, I think, good to see. Maybe some of these rivalries starting to build between the likes of Swiatek and Jabeur, as we touched on. So yes, a little bit of something on both sides that we haven't seen as much of recently, but has been nice to see.
And now we've moved quite a weird period of the season. There's a few weird periods of the season. First is the post-Wimbledon mini clay swing. And now we move into that era, that time of the season where the season's not over. There's still fairly decent events to play, obviously. A couple of Masters tournaments, and it culminates in the ATP finals. But it's a post-slam season. There's no more slams filled up to, so it is kind of this weird in-between time of the season. But, we've got... I mean, it's even stranger this season because the post-US Open schedule is different to usual as well. We're not 100% certain where we're going, I don't think. Usually we've got 2 Masters to look forward to. Got Shanghai usually, and then Paris. But I think the only one scheduled right now is Paris. I don't know if there's another Masters tournament yet on the tour calendar. So, like I say, a strange time of the season to be moving into, but still a lot of tennis left to play in 2022. So still more podcasts to bring, hopefully, and with no guarantee when we'll be back. We will be back, and we look forward to summing up more of the tennis and speaking with you all again. So thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.